Let's make a template. To make a template, we select Setup, and then Templates, and then New Template. Our opening screen wants us either to give a name for a new one, or what we could do is copy an existing one that we have permission to copy, and I could take any of the templates that I've got, make a copy of them, and modify them. But I'm going to make this from scratch, so I'm just not going to copy anything. I'm going to make a new one that I'm calling Demonstration. Now, the other thing I have to decide before I go any further is, will there be a subject for this template or will it be anonymous? If I select none, then there won't be a subject and it will be an anonymous template. I won't be able to identify who this observation is about. But typically, we're in a classroom and we want to be able to identify the teacher, so I'm going to pick teacher. Now, if you had administrators, principals, or students data also in your system, then you could be able to pick one of those also when you do the walkthrough. I'll leave it as teacher, it's called demonstration, and I click next. My next decision is to whether I use the standard form or the long format. Now, the standard form is what we usually use, and that allows you to name pages and have those act as dividers on your devices. If you were going to be restricted only to the web and you want to scroll without these dividers, then you could pick the long form. There's only one kind of an export type right now, and it's the standard one. If you're a special custom report made, you'd see it here and you'd be able to check which, if any, of those custom reports you wanted to have tied to this particular template. The other thing is this general settings. Now, we allow you to be able to attach PDFs or even images to a walkthrough, and if you want to enable that ability, then you can click Allow File Attachment. I'll allow it. Also notice up here that up until the time I save, it will be in editing mode. And when you do save this template, if there are any problems, the flag will go from green to orange, which is a warning. And if you click on that, it will show you where the problems are. And typically what will happen is you may pick items that do not work on certain devices, and it will warn you that these things don't work on particular devices. So now I'm going to go to my next phase, which is managing filters. Now, filters are those items which will allow you to do queries in your reports. A typical example is we want to be able to filter on grade and on subject. So I could say in a report, show me only the walkthrough data from grade 4 and 5 mathematics, and that's all you'd see. So in order to do that, we've got to be able to have people select the grade and the subject. So I'm going to enable the filter, and I've got three choices. A string, which means people would type in a phrase, for instance, mathematics, but they might put math, or they might put MA, or they might put maths. And because that's four different things, you'd never be able to get a report that gave you all four different ways of describing a mathematics class. And so because of that, what we use are value lists, and we give them a list of the possible selections so that when we do our report, we can pick exactly what do we want to see data from. So I'm going to go with the value list. And the value list I'm going to go with is one that I've made that's grade, because I want people to be able to pick the grade. And I'm going to go and what is default? What will they see when they initially start this walkthrough? I want them to see a prompt that says select a grade level. So that's what I choose as the default level. Now, before I go any further, I should also point there was a third option there, people lists. People lists are not used very often, and I've got a separate video on people lists, but a people list template means that you can have a checklist, which is a group of people. A typical example would be a teacher who has a group, which is the students that they teach. And so when they are doing this classroom observation or using it in their classroom, they could have an item which was students off task, and there would be all the students in their class and they check off who was off task. Or it could be who's brought their money in for a field trip, and they could enter the amount of money that the students had brought in for the field trip. So that's where people lists come into play. But typically we use value lists. My second value list is going to be for the subject. So I'm going to pick my subject value list, and my default is going to be select subject. And then I'm going to give each of them a name. Obviously, grade will just be called grade, and subject will be called exactly that. Now, there's one other option I've got. We have another place on the opening screen which will allow people to make an optional note or comment. And I'm going to use it, and I'm going to say it's optional so that they can do that. You could even have a default value filled in that said, when I first entered the classroom, what I saw was, and that would tell people you do want them to fill something in about what they first saw when they walked in the classroom. Now, I won't bother putting a default value in. And so now we're going to go to the main part of our template, which is what data do we want to collect? Well, I want to collect information about differentiated instruction. And so I'm going to go and find that particular element, which is right here. And that's a checkbox, so I can just check it off or not. That shows me it's a checkbox. And you see these icons here. This one means that there is no checklist attached. And this one means that this template hasn't been used and there isn't any data in it yet. If I want to be able to do it, and I'll do that in a second, I would click on the little plus sign and open this particular element up so I could attach things to it. There is a question mark here, and this gives you a legend for all the different kinds of icons that you will see. Okay, I'm now going to add my second one, and my second one is going to be about learning objectives. Now this one is a label, which means there's nothing that I can record with it, and I've got a checklist that I want to attach to it. So I click on the plus sign, and I assign my checklist, which is called Learning Objectives. There it is. There's a magnifying glass, so if I want to check it and see what it says, I can certainly do it. And yep, that's what I wanted to use. And then I can select the behavior of it. Do I want to act as a checklist, which means I just make checks in the checkboxes? Or do I want to put in a number? Or do I want to, every time I tap on it, have it increment by 1? Or do I want to be able to have a rating scale, in other words, a pull down where I can rate these individual things? Now, unless we're doing something with technology and we want to rate computers as needing repair or need to be replaced or something, a value list wouldn't be of much advantage. And I'll leave the behavior to be as a checklist. Also, we've got media capture. Now, for an iPhone or an iPod Touch, the new ones, which have got a camera, we could allow people to record images. And that image would go with this particular element. Now, I'm building this for generically, not just for an iPhone, so I'll leave it as none. But if I had my people using iPhones or iTouches with cameras, then I could have picked images and I could have allowed them to take a picture to go along with this particular element about learning objectives. Lastly, we can disable the element note. When you do a walkthrough, if the element note is enabled, which is the default, you can make a note if you need to. If you disable it, you won't even have the ability to do it. I'm going to leave the ability there to do it, so I won't touch it. I'm going to close the box, and notice that differentiated instruction has no checklist attached, but learning objectives has the one I just made. I'll talk about the little arrows here, but basically if I want to take learning objectives and move it to number 1, I just drag it up there, or I can drag it back. As you'll see later, I can also put it on a different page, but we'll get that in a second. Now I'm going to put a last one on here, and I want to talk about classroom decorum. And classroom decorum is a rubric, so I'm going to find my rubric for classroom decorum and pop it on here. And if I want to look at it, I can click on the little edit, and this will show me what I've got there. And if I click on the edit, I can see what in control is defined as, and I can go down to and take a look at out of control. So I've got a completed rubric, and I'm very happy with that. So that's going to be my first page. Now this page I want to rename, and I want to call it teaching. So I just give it a name and I click Save, and now that first page is called Teaching. I'm now going to add a new page. I'm going to call this new page Learning and save it. And I'm doing this because I want to put elements on this page which have to do with the kids learning. The first thing I want to put on here is learning enhancers. So I pick that. It's a label. I've got a checklist for it called enhancers. Again, if I want to look at it, I can absolutely do so. And that's my enhancers that I want to be able to work with. I'll leave it as a checklist. I want to put another one on about depth of knowledge. So I'm going to go down to my rubric that I've built on depth of knowledge. Put that on. Again, if I want to check it, I just click on the edit. This shows it to me. I've got my various levels here with their definitions. So I know I've got what I wanted. And I'll put one more on that I called instructional climate. So I pick my instructional climate. And I will look at that. And when I do look at it, I notice, you know, this really isn't about learning. This is more about the teaching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my instructional climate and I'm going to drag it up onto the 1 and I'm going to put it on page 1. Now page 1 has got instructional climate and page 2 doesn't. So now I've built my template the way I want it. I'm going to save it. It's successful. And if there were any problems with any of the possible devices, this would show it to me. If I click on this, it shows me it will work on any of the devices we support. If there was a problem with one of them, then that one would be indicated and it would tell me what the problem was. So that's what's involved in building a template. The last thing I should mention, though, is the significance of this little diamond. The diamond is empty because there's no data in it. But if I start to use a template and make walkthroughs with it, and if I want to change it, then there's some ramifications. And if we've got items in the template that nobody was using anyways, I can easily take them off because it's not going to change my reporting. But if data had been gathered, then it's going to let you know, and you'll have to decide whether you want to lose that particular data or not when you do your reporting. So that's building templates.